this author series. This is an initiative of Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs where you interact with the bestseller authors. Joining us today in this series is Dr. Pavan Soni. May I request Dr. Soni to kindly start your video? Welcome, Dr. Soni.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, good evening to you. It is an absolute pleasure to have you today with us. Before I hand over this virtual platform to Dr. Soni, I would like to give a brief introduction about him. Dr. Pavan Soni is an innovation evangelist by profession and a teacher by passion. He is the founder of Inflection Point, offering programs on design thinking, strategic acumen, and consulting skills. He is the author of the book Design Your Thinking, published by Penguin Random House in 2020. Apart from being an adjunct faculty at ISB Hyderabad and IIM Bangalore, Dr. Pavan is a columnist in Mint, Your Story, Inc. 42, and Entrepreneur and People Matters. Dr. Pavan was the only Indian to be shortlisted for the prestigious FT and McKinsey Breckenbauer Award for the Best Business Book of the year 2016. He has been invited 5 times to speak at the TEDx platform, and he's featured as one of the 100 digital influencers of 2020 by Your Story. So working towards creativity, innovation, and creating collaborative networks for the organization is his passion. Dr. Pavan is a gold medalist from MBM Engineering College, Jodhpur, and did his PGDI from NIT Mumbai. He has finished his doctoral study from IIM Bangalore in the domain of innovation management. So, Dr. Pavan Soni, this platform is yours, but today we have changed the format, and as per author's suggestion, this session is going to be a question answer session, and where I'll be asking questions to Dr. Soni, and during our conversation, the participants will also be knowing about the subject in deep. So, Dr. Soni, welcome you to our platform, and although this is a digital platform, but we will assure you we would love to have you at our campus sometime. And Dr. Soni, first question to you is, what is design thinking and how this mind mapping is different from design thinking? Because I have heard that there is something called mind mapping as well. So what is the difference between both the terms?
Absolutely. So let me start by showing the book. So here is the book.
Yeah, please.
Okay, this is called Design Your Thinking. This is
yes. We have already ordered for our institute, and we will be getting it in a day or two. And sure. I know this is available in Amazon as well.
Yes.
And also a Kindle version is available.
Yes.
So right. Over to you, Dr. Soni, please.
Yeah, thank you. So what is design thinking? In a very simple terms, you can think of design thinking as a human-centric, systematic way of problem solving. Whenever you're trying to solve any problem, you can either use common sense, which most of us use, or you can be very, very systematic. And what design thinking advocates is how do you become more systematic whenever it comes to problem solving. Now, what is mind mapping? The word mind mapping is coined by this gentleman by the name Tony Buzan. And what mind mapping does is that mind mapping is a manifestation of your mind on a piece of paper. Now, how does your mind work? Unlike the way we read sentence by sentence, word by word. Our mind doesn't think that way. Our mind thinks in terms of space. It connects the various subjects, matters which you have stored in your memory and starts to draw patterns from that. So mind mapping is where you start with a central idea. For example, if central idea for us is creativity, and if I have to do mind mapping, then what I can do is I can start with creativity, take a branch out of creativity and talk about traits of creative people. Take another branch out of creativity and talk about maybe habits. Another branch is education. What kind of education is required for creativity? Again, in education, I can talk about arts. I can talk about science. I can talk about craft. So mind mapping essentially is from a central idea, how do you go all around and spread your knowledge base. Now, what I've done in this book also is there is a mind map in the book itself. So for the reference of all my audience, here is the mind map. Let me show the mind map to all of you.
Yeah, please.
mind over here. This the entire book is actually summarized in the form of one single mind map. So this book is about 450 pages. What I've done is I have compressed all the 450 pages of the book into one single page. That is the power of mind map. So once you read the book, this map will be sufficient for you to sort of understand what is design thinking or what has been discussed in this particular book. So in short, Dr. Lata, design thinking is a process of problem solving. Mind mapping is a way of taking down notes. Now, for those of you in the audience who are parents, mind mapping is a very, very powerful technique to talk to your children. There is sufficient evidence for you to believe that mind mapping is very good to increase your memory power or that of your child, increase creativity, and make the child imaginative. Because unlike writing down linearly, what mind mapping interests is visualization of ideas. You use different colors, you use different size of the pen, etc., and you start visualizing the whole thing. And because your mind is much more receptive to visual input than textual inputs, mind mapping is very, very powerful when it comes down to creativity. So that's my view.
Okay, great, great. So please elaborate the chapter-wise description of your book.
Absolutely. So this book has 10 chapters, and let me just quickly go through the chapters which the talks about what is design thinking. Because a lot of people have misconceptions about design thinking. So I start by detailing out design thinking, how different it is from other ways of problem solving. The second chapter is why design thinking now. Why all of a sudden in the last 10-15 years we have shown a tremendous amount of interest in design thinking. Almost every day I'm doing webinars on this topic, and I have done more than 400 workshops on design thinking with private organizations, government establishments like ISRO, etc. And the reason why we're talking about design thinking today is because the problems that we are facing are increasingly becoming complex. Simple example is how do we inoculate people across the length and breadth of this country? It's a very complex problem, and you inoculate them 2 times, isn't it? The vaccine has to be given 2 times in a gap of 28 days. It's very complex. With a complex, the way we think also has to be complex. And that's why we are talking about design thinking. That's chapter number 2. Chapter 3 talks about the principles of design thinking. And here I've identified 10 key principles of design thinking. One of the very interesting principles that we Indians, I'm assuming almost everybody in the audience is an Indian, we Indians can usually benefit from is the ability of thinking with our hands, thinking with the hands, not thinking with your brain, not thinking with your mouth, thinking with your hands. And what I mean by thinking with your hands is that when instead of speaking that idea or even writing that idea, start to draw the idea. When you start drawing the idea, you will get a lot more clarity on your own idea. Plus, you will be in a better position to communicate your idea to the rest of the people. That's the third chapter. Then, design thinking has 5 stages. First stage is inspire. Stage is define. Fourth is prototype, and fifth step is scale. Then the next 5 chapters, 4 till about chapter number 8, is dedicated towards this particular aspect. There are last 2 chapters, design thinking in action, where I talk about what a 2-day design thinking program looks like. Before the threat of pandemic, almost all the design thinking workshops that I used to do were of 2 days. Then a lot of workshops in Delhi as well, with organizations. And in pandemic, we are doing 4-day workshops on design thinking, where each day is about 4 hours long. Here I talk about what does a typical design workshop look like, how you can run your own design thinking workshops in your own organization without consulting professional experts. And the last chapter is an interesting one, which talks about how to be a design thinker yourself. And here I've identified 7 traits of good design thinkers. One of the trait is being a good listener. Because I think unless you are a very good listener, you cannot be a good problem solver. And listening skill is not natural. We are not natural. You can't become good speaker, but being a good listener doesn't come naturally. It really requires a lot of effort. So that is what I talk about in this particular book. And this book is basis 400 workshops, 50 research papers and books, and 30 case studies. And there are lots of case studies in this book, from Maruti Suzuki to Big Bazaar, Big Basket, Tanishq, Taj Group of Hotels, Mahindra and Mahindra, Royal Enfield, Indian examples, Paytm, Flipkart. Okay, a lot of Indian examples I have given because people often think that design thinking does not apply to India. So unless we give Indian case studies, Indian examples, people do not really get that confidence. So that's been my objective in this book, Doctor.
Great, great. Very well said that we Indian things with our hands. Absolutely right. So I would like to know what's new about design thinking that you talk about in this book.
Absolutely. It's a good question, Doctor. So there are three misconceptions thinking. The first misconception is that design thinking is only for the startups. You cannot apply design
Correct.
thinking for a large organization or for a government organization or for a large establishment. It's only where the startups are there you can apply design thinking. That's the first misconception. The second misconception is design thinking is about product design. If you're
Yes.
designing a new device or designing new technology, that's second misconception. And the third misconception is that design thinking is predominantly a Western phenomenon. Now, I have tried to burst these three myths by giving lots of examples. But two very specific points which I have tried to bring to this book, which I think is a significant contribution to the literature of design thinking and the practice of design thinking, are these two stages of design thinking. The first is inspire. Now, I've been to lots of organizations doing design thinking workshops. And what I've realized is that many a times companies are not clear what do they want to achieve at the end of the design thinking workshop. They simply say, okay, guys, teach us design thinking. Let's do a design thinking workshop.
Correct.
Now, that's not inspiration enough. Inspiration can be that how do I increase my employee engagement score from 85% to 95% using design thinking? Is my customer satisfaction from X to Y using inspiration stage, which I've tried in this particular book, that how do you inspire your employees to really be creative? And I've spoken about a lot of Indian case studies again. And the second major contribution, I believe, is about scaling an idea. Now, one of my constant reservations has been that after every workshop, when I go out, I have this sinking feeling that what happens to all those ideas that we generated? In a typical workshop, we generate actually hundreds of ideas. But you know for a fact that not all these ideas really see the light of the day because they are not getting scaled, they're not getting invested upon, they just get lost somewhere. So in this book, I have also given a thrust on how do you really scale your ideas to make the ultimate impact. So two unique features of the book, if I may call out, one is the inspiration stage, and second is the scale stage. And then, of course, giving a lot of Indian context, making the book very amicable for an Indian audience has been the attempt here.
As you said, this book is based for Indian audience. So I have a question, particularly in India, we always fear of failure. Actually, कोई भी नया काम शुरू करेंगे तो we have a fear of failure कि ये होगा नहीं होगा कैसा होगा. So we cultivate the can we cultivate this design thinking on that part also?
That's a good
Is it
question.
possible?
Very much, very much. I think the young generation is now a lot more fearless than the previous generation. And that is happening because we are seeing a lot of examples all around us where people at a very young age have achieved so much. For example, if I look at, Ritesh Agarwal, the founder of Oyo Rooms. At a very young age, he started this company. At the age of 18, actually, he went on to start Oyo Rooms, and he has really done very good for himself. So similarly, Sachin and Vinny Bansal starting Flipkart. So one is that we have a lot of Indian case studies about the startup, which is giving confidence to the young people that life is not all about getting employed somewhere and then working there for the next 40, 45 years and then getting retired. You have a, that's one major thing. And that's happening because of our media. Our media is now celebrating a lot more case studies, a lot more startups. If I heard Mr. Ratan Tata talking about how the young generation of entrepreneurs can create a new India. So instead of depending on government, instead of depending on large enterprises like Reliance, Tata's, and Aditya Birla Group, now we are depending on smaller companies. Look at the amount of employment Big Basket and Flipkart has generated. Tremendous amount, isn't it? No other organization can parallel the amount of employment these two organizations have generated. Ola, Uber, are generating lots of employment. So that is one thing which is really helping out. The second thing is management. I always believe that, and I'll quote, this might be interesting for most of you since you are in leadership roles, is that the role of a leader is not to innovate. The role of a leader is to not innovate, but the role of a leader is to protect those who innovate. That's important. But you have to come up with ideas every day. But the people who are coming up with ideas, what type of protection, what type of air cover do you give to these people? That's important. Let me give you a simple example. And this is something that happened in a company called Tanishq in Tamil Nadu, Hosur. Okay. And the case goes like this. So Tanishq is one of the biggest importers of gold in India. And they use crucibles. These are carbide crucibles to melt gold. After some time, these carbide crucibles are waste because the gold get stuck into this crucible wall and you can't anymore. So they kind of crucibles in the yard trapped in the crucible. And the leadership team was actually not aware that how do we take gold out of all waste crucibles. One day, what happens is there is a gentleman who works in Hosur factory. His name is Rajshekhar, junior guy, Rajshekhar. He gives 250 rupees to his neighbor who has a road roller and comes to office 8 a.m. on a road roller. People are wondering that what is he doing with a road roller. He takes a crucible out, puts that on the road on a chatai or a mat, puts a crucible on the road and rolls the road roller. People are actually, there's a crowd gathered around him wondering that what is he doing. After one or two rolls, you could literally see gold on the road. And on that day, believe me, in a single day, by rolling the crucibles, he recovered 4 kilogram of gold. What is the investment? 250 rupees. Now, think about this. If he would have gone to his supervisors a day before, asked him that, sir, I have an idea of recovering gold. Roll, can I bring a road roller from my friend and roll the crucibles and get gold? People would have said, this is absurd. But the thing about creativity is that for you to take risk, you need to have a prototype, a simple prototype. Nobody will believe your idea. People will believe your idea. A proof of concept. What was the proof of concept? 250 neighbor, a road roller, and one crucible. If that doesn't work, what have I damaged? 250 rupees, that's my loss. And what have I lost? I just lost one crucible. But if it works, the upside is 4 kilogram of gold. And now you believe me, that has become a standard practice at Tanishq to recover gold. So if you need to be really creative, what you need to do is to learn to design your experiment. You need to have calculated risk. And if you can do so, where you can take a risk and this risk really works, I don't think people would have to blame you. So risk is a risk only if you are not planning for it. If you start to plan for it, there is nothing called a risk.
Okay, great. I really liked you said that leaders are not innovative, but they protect the innovation.
Absolutely. They are not supposed to innovate, but they are supposed to
So
protect those who innovate.
yes. So many time organization do not allow time for the thinking to develop in the people and expect instant new product services. So every time the customer dreams to get their problem solved at the first instance, and whether design thinking may helping achieving that also.
Very good question. Very good question, actually.
Thank you.
So let me tell you what design thinking really emphasizes on, Dr. Lata. Design thinking emphasizes on thinking slow, not thinking fast, thinking slow.
Okay.
Now, this may be very counterintuitive. That why am I saying thinking slow? But everybody on the call, think about this for a moment. That when you think fast, you're not even thinking, you're only reacting. There's no thinking which is happening, you're only reacting. Okay? But when you're thinking slow, is when you're actually thinking. So, what we need to learn is for any organization, for any team, the first thing that you need to learn is to prioritize and to understand that not every problem is worth solving. Please learn that. Because if you start attacking every single problem, that you would realize that you are exhausted and you have not achieved anything significant as a result of that. You are feeling tired, but nothing much moved. Leaders increasingly they realize that they need to pick their battles very wisely. Problems which are worth solving very, very correctly, very wisely. That's the first thing. The second thing is innovative companies like 3M. Google, etc., they always give employees free time to pick up their hobby project. So one of the metrics which we have been very wrongly using in our corporations is productivity metrics. Number of lines of code written per day, number of cases addressed per day, number of parts assembled per day. This output by input kind of a matrix is not good for cultivating creativity. Creativity requires a lot of slack. It requires you to waste time sometimes. It requires you to take a detour, to go in a wrong direction sometimes. And if employees are so much loaded with work, they will never ever afford to be creative. They will never ever afford to fail. So, two things that we need is we need to give time to people by not overloading them. And that means we also need to change the way we measure them. We don't have to measure productivity. We have to measure creativity. Okay. The second thing that we need to give is resources to experiment. Let me give you an example. Many years back, what happened was, this was, I think, in 1980s. I'm talking of HP, Hewlett Packard. So David Packard, who was a co-founder of HP, was taking a tour of the facility, and he saw that there is, there is a lab in which a technician is working late in the night, and he just took to the technician and asked him that why are you working so late in the night? And he said that I'm working because it's important project for me, and my while my family is back home and they're missing me and I'm also missing them dearly, but I have a deadline to meet. So he simply said that why can't you take this whatever experiment you're doing, you can take this entire equipment to your home and do the experiment from your home. And after that, you believe me, HP had a policy that they will never ever lock their labs. Employees are free to take the equipment from the lab to their home. Because an idea can occur to you anytime. You may not be in office when the idea comes to you, but you need the equipment, you need the resources. So I think if you give people, without asking them questions, if you give people enough resources, they will be creative. I don't think that people don't want to be creative. Let's not treat humans like machines. That's a big disservice that we end up doing to them. So that's how you can actually make people take more calculated risk, and perhaps the risk taking appetite can also go up. That's my view.
Great. So does design thinking require special talent or qualification for someone to practice, and how is different from this project-based learning?
Yeah. So firstly, it doesn't require any specific skill that someone would have. As long as we are human beings, which we are, there is no specific training that we need. But there are three things which I would like to strongly advocate that anybody should be able to pick up to be a better problem. First skill that you need to develop is visual thinking skills. Design thinking comes from design, and design is primarily about visualization. So instead of you writing something down, try to see next time if you can start drawing it. Try to maintain a notebook without rule pages, without lines, so that every time you have to write, you don't have to write linearly. You can start sketching. So that's the first skill that you would like to create, is to start drawing stuff. Help you connect the two halves of the brain, the left half and right half, and allow you to be more fluent in your thinking. Second thing that you can all pick up is good listening skills. I can never ever overemphasize on the importance of being a good listener. It's very critical to be a good listener. Listen with intent. Don't listen to give an answer. Listen to understand the problem. Because if you don't solve the problem, it is okay. But if you don't understand the problem, that is not okay. That is unpardonable, I believe, as a leader. That's the second skill. So first skill is drawing skill. Second is good listening skill. And third skill, which I would like you to understand, is the importance of iteration. Let me give you a simple example. Half an hour back, we had a call. Me and Dr. Lata had a call. Okay. And we were just discussing about, no, now 1 hour back, now since we are half an hour into the conversation, 1 hour back, two of us had a call. And I simply asked her that what is the format? And she said that usually the format is that the speaker comes and he or she has a presentation and the person speaks for about 45 minutes and then we open up the questions around. So I said that why not we tweak the stuff? Now she had the mental agility and the adaptability to quickly say that, okay, let's do that. In the next 10 minutes or 5 minutes, I sent her a set of 7 questions. And in the next 5 minutes, she sent me another 7 questions. We are here in the middle of the discussion. You see, that's the adaptability I'm talking about. Being change oriented, adapting very quickly. And that's called iterative thinking. And actually, the question that she had, she might even iterate within those questions. She might skip a few questions, she might add another set of questions on the fly. This adaptability is very critical. So, in summary, the three skills that everybody should be able to develop to be a design thinker. The first is you need to be visual. Start to visualize things instead of writing them down, instead of speaking them. Speaking is easy, writing is difficult, drawing is even more difficult. It is difficult because it makes you think hard, right? Drawing is not easy for adults. For children, it is very easy, but for adults, it's not very easy because you have to think very hard. You are very conscious. So I think if you can learn to draw more, you would become more confident about your own thinking abilities. The second is good listening. Third is adaptive, being adaptive to the situation, iterating very quickly, and that's, I believe, the highest form of intelligence. So that's my view, Dr. Lata.
Great. Thank you for your kind words, Dr. Soni. Uh, I just wanted to know how the Indian companies will benefit from adopting design thinking, and whether this design thinking is limited. As I think you have already answered this question, that this is not only for the startups. High tech companies are also can do this design thinking. But how much these Indian companies can benefit from adopting these design thinking methods, and whether the technology driven society can transform this whole thinking?
Yeah, yeah. So I think Indian companies will benefit enormously from being more disciplined about innovation. One of the biggest misconceptions that we have about innovation is that innovation is equal to R&D. We think that only the R&D department has to innovate. The rest of us have to do our own job. That's a wrong approach. Everybody has to innovate. The learning and development department has to innovate. The HR department, production department, security, every department, transport department, every department has to innovate. So what design thinking will bring to the bearing is a systematic approach to innovate. If today you want to be a better thinker, if you want to be a better innovator, what design thinking can do to you is to give you a step by iterating solutions and validating those solutions. And you can do that in any domain, any context. That's the first thing that we need to understand. The second thing that the design thinking can bring to you is confidence. Nothing can give you more confidence than solving a problem yourself and being able to see the solution in reality. Instead of trying to take a very big problem and waiting for the solution to happen, break the problem into more manageable pieces
Okay.
and try to see in a very iterative fashion if you can quickly turn that around and show it to others to get confidence. So I believe a more systematic, disciplined approach and self-confidence is what this approach can lend to almost all Indian companies of shape and size.
So whether this design thinking can be inculcated in anything we do, any work we do?
I guess so, because when I talk, whether it's a homemaker or an entrepreneur or a school going child or a college going kid or a working professional or an entrepreneur, what are we doing? We are all trying to solve problems on a day-to-day basis, right? That's what we are doing for a living. We are all problem solvers. Where what to make today for breakfast, right? Where to go for the vacation whenever you go, where to do shopping from. All these are problems that we are trying to solve. Now, how do we solve problems? We solve problems either by using common sense, or by using gut feel or intuition, or by just going through the motions. But what design thinking can bring to you is a slightly more disciplined way. So I just don't think, Dr. Lata, that there is any domain which is immune to the application of design thinking, or at least thinking, if not design thinking. Will tremendously benefit if we become better thinkers as a result.
Okay. So do you think this jugaad is also a type of innovation?
Yeah, so jugaad is an interesting question. Jugaad is an Indian term for improvisation. You must have seen in North India there is a bullet engine used to run a four-wheeler.
Cart.
That's called
Correct.
jugaad, a cart. That's called jugaad, and this has become a sort of a placeholder for anything which is improvisational. Now, the problem with improvisation or jugaad is that it serves the purpose for the time being. It's like a quick fix. It only serves the purpose for the time being. It cannot be scaled. It cannot be made reliable. and it can be made replicable. The same person cannot do the same thing in a different context. The person cannot teach others on how to do it, and jugaad cannot be reliable means after all. Correct? Now, if we are as a country, as a society, if we are celebrating jugaad, then we will never ever build products, services, and institutions which are long lasting, which are reliable.
Correct.
Like you can't use a jugaad mentality to build a bridge. You can't. You
Correct.
can't take a jugaad mentality to build a car. If you have to build a genuine car, you have to build a bridge, and if you have to build an architecture that will live for hundreds of years, we have to move away from jugaad-based thinking to a systematic thinking. And that is where jugaad can be a starting point, but jugaad can never be the finishing line. The finishing line definitely has to be something which is much more systematic and thoughtful, and that's what Indians can and should benefit from changing.
So I would request participants also to raise your questions, and you may enter in the chat box if you have any questions to be asked from Dr. Soni. Sir, I have one more question. Is there any standard we need to take care while designing such projects?
I think
Any
there are a
standard?
couple of things. Yeah, absolutely, there are a couple of things that are required for a design thinking project. If you have to start a design thinking project in say your organization, what do we
Right.
need? There are three good qualifiers of a design thinking project. The first qualifier is that you need to have time. Design thinking needs time. You can't use design thinking when you have to solve urgently. Okay, because I'm saying think slow, and if you have to solve problem urgently, you can't think slow. You have to just ship it. So you need to have time. The second thing is you need to have diversity of talent. Because वो शेर है ना एक कि तुम ही तुम हो तो क्या तुम हो और हम ही हम हैं तो क्या हम हैं
तो क्या हम हैं?
तो क्या हम हैं. So if everybody is like you, then you have no value. And if everybody is like me, then I have no value. My value comes when I am different from others. Now, being different from others is not easy. It is painful at times. And that's why if you can cultivate diversity. And the third thing, the first is time, the second is diversity of talent, and the third thing is access to customers. It is very easy to get lost in your own world of problems and your own world of solution and think that, okay, I have solved the problem. Unless and until the customer says that, yes, you have solved the problem. Yes, you are doing what is offbeat or creative. You cannot claim to be creative. So I think an access to customers who can validate your thinking very rapidly is very critical for a design thinking project.
Okay. So your three predictions for the future entrepreneurship in India, if they follow this design thinking.
So the first is the entrepreneurship will be much more broad based going forward, and this has only become much more accelerated with pandemic. Now for the last 1 year people have been working from home,
Correct.
and the connection between a corporate and them is getting diluted. They are just getting salaries at the end of the month and they're participating in meeting, and somewhere they might start to realize that maybe if I have to anyways work for a client, why not I work with the client directly? I have to work for a customer, why not work for the customer directly? Why do I need this agency called my company, which takes my talent from one hand, take customers' problem from the other hand, and keeps a margin in between? So if I'm so talented and if all I need is to sit at my home, then maybe I can do it directly. So freelancers, right? Gig economy, one person entrepreneurship kind of setup will grow because of this realization. That's the first major turn of events that might happen. The second thing is that what I mean by entrepreneurship is not necessarily a profession. What I mean by entrepreneurship is a way of life. For example, Dr. Lata, even though she is employed at an enterprise, IICA, but she is a very enterprising person. This is my first formally. But the way she reached out, she adapted, she is developing and demonstrating those entrepreneurial traits. Correct? Now, that doesn't mean that she has to quit this company and start something. You can be an entrepreneur even in a large organization. That's the second. People will become much more enterprising. Instead of being told what is to be done, they would take up the charge and figure out what is the best way of doing something and then come around. The second. And the third thing is children. Why do we see so much of innovation happening in the West? The reason why, especially in the US, is because from a very early age, the child is made independent. The child sleeps in a separate room on a separate cot. Child does its own work to earn pocket money, like delivering newspapers, serving, cleaning the table, mowing somebody's lawn, etc. So the child develops an enterprising ability, understands the value of money. Even when the child goes to the college, the child has to pay for the tuition fee by taking extra classes, by teaching somewhere, by doing part-time jobs, by doing a shift, by doing night jobs. That doesn't apply in India. There's hardly any case where a child does any part-time job to get a tuition fee. It's mostly the parents who pay for it, or in certain cases, we have the loans being given. If we can get the same mentality in our country, where children can develop enterprising behavior. For example, they are doing a project in the ninth standard and they come up with a very interesting science project. Can they now start thinking that how do I make money out of it? Can I put this in some sort of a packaging and put it out in the market for 100 rupees outside a Reliance store? When people are coming and going, I'll demonstrate this 100 rupees, that's it. That kind of a thinking has never come to Indians, especially children, because people's parents think that selling is bad, right? Don't sell it. We have enough money. Don't sell it. हमें पैसे की जरूरत नहीं है. But what they are not understanding that आपको पैसे की जरूरत नहीं है, but इसको है, right? And it is not about money. It's about the way of making money, entrepreneurship that the child has to learn, enterprising nature that the child has, the sales skills that the child has to learn. So now I'm seeing a lot of parents are gearing up to this philosophy that maybe my child can put a stall somewhere and start selling stuff. She'll learn negotiation. She'll understand the value of money. She'll understand how to convince somebody. And these are life skills that you would need for the rest of your life. So that is my prediction, Dr. Lata, about how entrepreneurship is going to unfold in our country going forward.
Great. So we have a question from one of the participants. What are the mindsets, tool sets, and skill sets for creative problem solving?
Thank you. So it's a good question. So I'll just talk about, in this book, I talk about 20 such elements, which I'll obviously not have time to deliberate right now. And I would encourage you to pick up the book as a result. But one, I'll tell you, suppose I want to understand the problem that the person is suffering from, a real problem that a real person is suffering from. So what's a mindset? The mindset that I need to have is that of empathy, samvedana, sahanubhuti. That maybe what he's saying is not the real problem. Maybe I'm asking the wrong question. I need to understand from the person's perspective. What he's saying and what his eyes are saying are not matching. What he's saying and what he's doing is not matching. So that is the mindset that we need to develop. The second thing is a tool set. What's a good tool set? A good tool set is mind mapping. Can I quickly talk to a person in the real time, start drawing a mind map of the whole situation and start kind of connecting the dots? That's a tool set. Skill set. A good skill set is listening skill. So listening skill is a skill set. Compassion or empathy is the mindset, and mind map is a tool set. So all of these three things can come in handy when you're trying to understand. Simply when you're trying to solve a problem, we have a whole other set of needs that can be brought to bearing. That's a good question, though.
Great. I have read a book by Tim Brown, who is the chair of IDEO, and he frequently speaks about the value of design thinking, creative leadership, and innovation to business leaders and designers around the world. He has also quoted somewhere that design thinking is neither an art or science nor a religion. It is a capacity ultimately for integrated thinking. What is your opinion?
Yeah, I'm a great fan of Tim Brown, by the way. And his book called Change by Design is something that really
Correct.
inspired me to write my own book. And I wrote to him, maybe over the email, to write, requesting to write a blurb for my book, a recommendation for my book, which I somehow could not get. So I hope he also gets to read my book sometime. Coming back, integrative thinking means your capacity to connect divergent thinking and convergent thinking. Usually, most people are very good at convergent thinking. For example, if I tell me 10 ways of keeping employee motivated when they're working from home, you might struggle. But if I ask you that here are the 10 ways which I have, pick the one which is best, then you can do it. So generating 10 ways is not easy, but picking one of the 10 is easy. So most of us are very good at convergent thinking, but not very good at divergent thinking. What Tim Brown talks about in this thing called integrative thinking is your ability to do both of these aspects very smoothly. You can you can possibly become very good divergent thinker and a very good convergent thinker. And more difficult it is to have divergent thinking. And that's something that you need to start practicing. And for that, what you need is essentially lower your inhibitions, lower your hesitation. If you're too hesitant, then you will never be able to generate some real creative thoughts.
Okay. So there is a question from one of the participants. How can you become proficient in design thinking philosophy? Could you suggest a good training program to develop this skill?
Okay. So
I
incidentally,
think you are already doing these
yes.
workshops.
Yeah, correct. So actually, I'm doing a training program starting 20th of February with NHRD, Bangalore chapter. So this is a certification program on design thinking. I'll give you the link of the program in just a moment.
You may
So
share.
this, yes, I'll share it on the chat right now. Here is the link. Okay. So please click on this nhdbangalore.com. So this program is I'm doing with a certificate program, by the way. So you get a certificate of completing the project. So it's a 5-week program. We work on every Saturday starting 20th of February, where we take a real world problem and solve it using design thinking. Last cohort, we had about 60 participants from about 30 companies, big companies, and contribute entrepreneurs also there. So I would strongly encourage you to be part of this particular program, HRD, that is starting on 20th. So that might be useful. Mr. Ramki, I've shared the link.
Ah, yes.
How
So I
many types
think
of thinking?
participants,
Yeah, there's one more
how
question.
many types of thinking? Okay. Yeah.
Okay. As far as I know, the 4 major types of thinking that I can think of. Okay. So one is called inductive, second is called deductive. That's one broad classification. Inductive means you start from data points and you develop a pattern, and from that pattern, you develop a theory. That's called inductive thinking, inductive logic. Then you have deductive thinking. Deductive means you deduce from a principle or from a theory and you validate your deductions. For example, if I have to understand the movement of various planets in the solar system, then the theory which I'll start from is gravitation theory. And from there, I'll deduce. Okay. But if I have to come with a new theory, and the new theory could be about employee motivation during pandemic, then I will observe 10 employees, 15 employees, come up with a hypothesis, test the hypothesis with 10 other employees, and then come up with a theory. And the theory could be that if employees are given specific times for the meeting in a day and no day meetings, right? In a day there is no meeting, then they'll be far more productive than packing their day with back-to-back meetings. That becomes a theory or that becomes a recommendation. These are two broad ways. When it comes to problem solving, once again, you can look at various ways of thinking. One is called lateral thinking, one is called parallel thinking, critical thinking, and design thinking. Lateral, critical,
Correct.
parallel, design. And in down the various pluses and minuses of each of these models and how design thinking pretty much encompasses the best of the various models.
Great.
So design thinking
So
can be thought of as an overarching methodology.
you spoke about empathy. So when conducting an empathy interview, is it okay to use our own experience to interpret and understand others' experiences?
It is unavoidable, I would say, because the only way you can make sense of some other person's statement is by putting it as a reference to your own experiences in life. But buying what you need to avoid doing, however, is too much of it. You should not get too much carried away by your own past experiences. Otherwise, you're not empathizing with the person genuinely. You're trying to fit the incoming information in your own stereotype, in your
Correct.
own mental models. So, ideally, when we are doing genuine empathy exercises, it is pretty much advisable to go out with a blank slate, with a completely open mind. And after the first or second round of interviews, you can start coming up with some patterns, but don't force those patterns into your way of thinking. Otherwise, you might miss out on some important insights.
Okay. So how do you prioritize ideas during or post brainstorming?
So we use a couple of methods. One is the desirability, viability, feasibility framework. So an idea which is desirable to the end user, viable in terms of technology, and feasible for the business is something that we pick it up. Another metrics is by doing prototype. So we do rapid prototypes to see which idea works, which does not work. So there are standard methods which are available on how do you do prototyping.
Okay. And at what point do you think that constraints will be there, such as budgets or when we come into process?
So there are two schools of thought here. One is, should you put the constraints before the ideation exercise? Second is, should you put the constraints after the ideation exercise? I believe that if you have a genuine concern and a genuine constraint, you should put it before. I'll give you a simple example, and the audience can also chip in. I'll speak two statements and tell me which of them is a better statement for problem generation, in the sense, in which of the two statements will we have better ideas. Statement number one: how do we reduce the employee attrition from 10% to 5%? That's a statement number one. Statement number two: how would you reduce the employee attrition from 10% to 5% without increasing the cost of operation by 2%, more than 2%? The two cases will we have high quality ideas. First or second? What do you say? When I put a constraint of
Let me
2%, or
let me ask the audience. Just
okay,
ask the
go ahead.
audience.
Go
Yes,
ahead, team.
anybody from the audience?
In first situation, I simply said reduce the attrition from 10% to 5%. In the second, I said reduce it from 10 to 5%, but don't make it too costly. The cost cannot go up by more than 2%. Which one will give me better
So,
ideas?
so answer is first from one of the participant, Shanti Shrikant.
Okay.
Uh, Dr. Alka Rathi and
Yeah.
Shukshankar Jha, they have said second.
Actually, the right answer is second. And the reason second is the right answer is because what if the employee comes up with wacky ideas? Give them a trip to, abroad every year, cut down the number of working days by half, etc., etc. That is going to take your cost off the roof.
Correct.
But if I say that my cost should not go very high, then people will be creative. So whenever you have to really push the people to be creative, always put the constraint beforehand and don't do it after. The problem will be tight. And when the problem is tight is when the people will actually be creative.
So, what do you think the best way? People talking or people working independently?
Working independently and then talking. In brainstorming session and then talking. In brainstorming sessions, what happens is when people start to talk together, a lot of ideas get lost. Plus, you're always sensitive about what will people think about me or my idea. Instead of that, if you think in isolation for about 5-10 minutes, write down all your ideas, and then come together in the brainstorming session. That is far more mature, and you will have far more everybody talking together. So think independently, write your ideas, and then talk.
So, being in a government organization, I would like to know how can government apply this design thinking concept?
Hmm. So one of the government organizations that has actually done a phenomenal job is ISRO, in
Okay.
applying design thinking, in applying innovation, etc. But if I were to leave you with two aspects which can be very useful, the first aspect is that we need to allow people to have their free time and free resources, where they can pick up a project or assignment that is not necessarily their day's job, side project. Something which is very critical, because many times the side project can be really a source of expressing your own creativity. Your main project may not be so creative, but side project can be very creative. That's the first thing. And the second thing is we need to use our space more creatively. Can we have those centers where people can huddle together, those walls where you can formal, use chart papers, sketch color pens, and start doodling. So if we can have more space for people to express their creativity, I guess we'll have it can be done in any organization, government or private.
So there was a question to your previous answer that whether constraints ahead restrict the brainstorming.
Brainstorming. It doesn't. If there is no constraint, there is no creativity. Keep that in mind. If there is no constraint, there is no creativity. Okay? We need creativity because of constraints. If you had infinite resources, infinite time, infinite money, and no pressure, who would be creative? Nobody becomes creative in so much of access. People become creative when there is a deficiency, when there is a constraint. It really comes. The only thing I'm advocating is bring the constraint to everybody's notice. Bring it up front so that people know, okay, I only have so much time, I only have so much budget, I only have to ensure that this is my boundary condition. Give the boundary condition to people and then see how much of a wonders they can do. Don't leave it to surprise. Let's take the last question.
Any, yeah. So anybody, please feel free to submit the questions on the chat box. So your advice to young generation.
Okay. Mm, simple things. First thing is importance of focus. Or if you go on the internet, there is so much of a news and views that get mixed up and they start bombarding you that it is very easy to get lost. You don't even realize that what am I supposed to do uniquely. So learn to focus. Learn to know what your uniqueness is and focus on that uniqueness. Don't speak in a matter that you cannot add a significant value. You're just adding noise, nothing else. So learn to focus. That's very, very critical. Focus on all aspects of life. The second thing which I want you to develop is to invest in yourself. Gone are the days when you can claim that I've studied from such and such best institute and that study will survive me for the next 40 years. No. You need to learn on a continuous basis, formally and informally. So being a continuous learner, and there are so much more available nowadays on the internet, etc., where people can pick up learning. So first is being focused, second is being a continuous learner, and third is to be a good listener. I think a lot of us are losing out on the importance of listening skills. And youngsters pride themselves in big, good speakers. But for every good speaker, you need to have a bunch of listeners also. So we need more listeners today than speakers, perhaps. So good listening skill, yourself, and being very focused about what you can do better than most others can put our youngsters in a better shape, is what I believe.
Okay. There was a question that our education system does not encourage thinking, leave alone design, lateral thinking or parallel thinking. How does one change this? I think NEP 2020 has already shared their views. The policy document is already available on the net. But still, we would like to listen from you.
I don't see. I personally do not like to blame the education system. I just don't like that. For the simple fact that more than the school, the children are spending time in the. So instead of blaming the principals, blaming the teacher, or blaming the education system for their lack of thinking, we have to start introspecting about parenting. Are we as parents developing critical thinking skills in our children? Are we giving enough autonomy to the children in our family that they are taking risk? If they are scribbling something on the wall, if we reprimand them, "Gandi mat karo," we are killing creativity right there. If the person is asking a question, we say to the child, "Don't ask so many questions." We are killing creativity there. Why blame school? So I would like all the parents to start thinking that am I being a good dad or a good mom when it comes down to encouraging creativity in my own child. And then I think we have the right and the reason to blame the education system. It's very fashionable actually to blame the education system. But that does not solve the problem. If I look at our education system versus most colleges, universities, we have some amazing practices. But our upbringing at family, our upbringing at home, and where parents are giving enough time to their children, I think that is where we need to start introspecting a bit. and we'll all if we can do so. That's my view, Priya.
So anything else? Great. So thank you, Dr. Soni. It was really insightful, and thank you for breaking it down and explaining in relatable terms. I like the statement, it is not about design, it is about thinking. Many times, organizations do not allow time to thinking, as I said, but you have very rightly described everything in a very nice manner, and you have very well explained the practitioner's perspective on how the teenage methods and discipline of design thinking can be applied across a range of domains, including to everybody or in everyday's problem. And you also help to become an expert problem solver through the use of appropriate tool sets, skill sets, and mindsets. So there are a lot of takeaways from your session that developing a system to formally manage and nurture innovation in a corporate setup, exhibiting leadership in managing such transformational but fluid undertakings. Then here again, I would like to quote that thinking is like designer can transform the way you develop products, services, processes, and every strategy. So thank you, Dr. Soni, for enlightening session. And let me take this opportunity to thank our DG and CEO who has promoted us to do such author talk series and where we get opportunity to interact with such eminent authors. Thanks to my colleagues, Dr. Neeraj Gupta, Dr. Neeti Shikha, Dr. Tara Shankar for all the support throughout. I would also like to thank all the participants for their valuable inputs and active participation. And Dr. Soni, thank you so much. And we will really going to meet soon. And we will meet very soon and with another eminent author also in coming days. And we will look forward to Dr. Soni to interact with our students and executives for in some sessions as well. So thanks one and all.
Thank you. I've also put the link to the book.
Yes.
So you might want to pick it up whenever time permits you. Thank you so much, Dr. Lata, for hosting me. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thanks
Take
to
care,
all.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.